Hey guys, welcome to another episode of SG Explain. Thanks for joining us. This is our third episode, and we're very excited to keep doing this. We actually have a very interesting one today.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I had a lot of fun doing the research for this, but we're essentially talking about Singapore's history before Raffles. I think a lot of us know the history from our social studies or history classes, but I was always very curious what happened before, because in my travels I've heard of like ancient empires and like kings and stuff like that, and I always wondered that why doesn't Singapore have that? It seems like we're an island in the middle of Southeast Asia. There should be something here. And it was very cool to be able to see we actually do, and we have some good nuggets here that I think will make for some really interesting.
Essentially, we're going to be giving a history lesson today. But of course, a lesser known part of history about Singapore's pre-colonialism. Well, that's a mouthful. But essentially, guys, today we'll be running through, definitely I know this year we're talking about Singapore's bicentennial, 50 years of self-governance, and of course, our 50 what birthday again?
I think we're 53.
53, that's right. Yeah,
Willie, how did you forget this?
Yeah, I should be totally, yeah. But anyway, here we are.
Yep.
Are you ready, Rovik?
Yep.
Today's going to be...
I just want to quickly note for those who are watching us on Facebook Live that for the first time, I am not wearing black. People have been commenting how we've been conforming our uniform, and so we're different. That's a big thing.
I'm still wearing black.
Yeah, you'll stay boring.
Okay.
We're trying to keep it interesting.
Old is gold.
So let's get into it.
Okay.
Let's go way back in time to the first ever mention of Singapore, the island that is known as Singapore.
Okay.
So the first time it was actually mentioned is actually disputed. It's between two different sources. So we have one which is all the way in Greece, and it's mentioned maybe in the 2nd century. That's what some of these resources tell us, but by this guy called Ptolemy. And what happened was that Ptolemy is a Greco-Roman scholar, and he has this famous book called Geographia. And basically what they say is that they mention the island of Singapore at the southernmost tip of the Malayan Peninsula, and they call it Sabana. So that's one of the names that we have, Sabana. Yeah. The other one, so you can imagine one ancient source of history is in Europe. The other ancient source is actually, as you would expect, Chinese. So the Chinese source of history basically is from a 3rd century Chinese traveler.
Okay.
And basically they describe an island at the exact same location, but they call it Pu Luo Chung. Am I pronouncing it right? Pu Luo Chung.
Pu Luo Chung.
Yeah. And that basically refers to Singapore's early Malay name, Pulau Ujong. So we have Pulau Ubin, we have Pulau Tekong, and actually people don't know the name of the island itself, the mainland. That is actually still today, people still call it, like historians and geographers, and we actually have a name for the mainland.
Pulau Ujong.
Pulau Ujong.
Okay.
So people always say, "Oh, I'm going from the mainland." Actually, you can.
So we call it Singapore Island.
Yeah. So Singapore Island is the official name.
Okay.
But actually, Pulau Ujong is also the name, and it basically means island at the end.
Island at the... Oh man, that sounds kind of grim.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those things in like a TV show where like we have to go to the island,
at the end.
And that's basically Pulau Ujong.
Can you hear Chola Empire? Welcome to Singapore. No.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to talk about that because Chola Empire is part of this huge meme that people still refer to Singapore, and he is the pirate king.
Right.
And we're going to talk about Singapore's pirates actually later on.
Oh, cool.
In the episode.
Love that.
But
anything pirate is exciting.
Yeah. But I think we should get to how we got the name Singapore or Singapura.
Singapura.
Yeah. Before that, it was called Temasek. So back in the day, basically, people around here, especially in the Malayan archipelago, they call the island Temasek. But there was a series of things that were happening around the time Singapore was basically right in the center of a lot of battles. Empires used to exist, and people used to be fighting all around this area. And it was only probably around the end of the 14th century that's when we actually got the name Singapura. And that story is actually very interesting.
Sure. And I think the Chinese call it they call it Tan Ma Si. That's the old Chinese name for Temasek.
Right.
I think most of the Chinese things that we're hearing right now are all pretty much like a direct translation of Malay. It seems like, see, Temasek is like Tan Ma Si. I think that's like some kind of direct translation for something.
That makes a lot of sense. And so there were actually many things that were happening, right? So maybe your research, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But there were the Chinese that were basically going around, basically trying to explore and do trade in the region.
Yeah.
But there were a number of key empires, right? So we have the Chola Empire, which is basically one of the great empires from South Asia.
Yep.
You had the Sri Vijaya Empire.
Okay.
And so that was...
so we're talking Game of Thrones right now, right?
Yeah, this is...
Chola, Sri Vijaya.
Yeah, you have the Majapahit.
The Majapahit.
Empire, which is basically the Indonesian Empire.
Which is somewhat like... that forms the current Indonesian archipelago as a country.
Basically,
right?
That's where they say like the origins come from. And with the Majapahit Empire, like if you want to compare it to anything, you have to think about. You do watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah, I do.
So basically, the Iron Islands, right? Is basically these people. They don't really care about the actual land. They just rule on the sea, and so that's essentially what they do. They are the Iron Islands of Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And they only care about maritime stuff. And there's one more important empire, and that's called the Ayutthaya Empire.
Ayutthaya.
Yeah. And so that's basically around, it's close to the Siamese Empire. It's Cambodia, Thailand, that region.
Okay.
And so if you imagine what Singapore is, we have the Ayutthaya Empire on top. We have the Majapahit Empire, all around the islands, and then you have also the historical Sri Vijaya and Chola Empire making its way. And so Singapura basically was in the middle of a lot of stuff, and that kind of lends to a lot of historical stuff. We're going to see sieges, we're going to see battles, and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, let's get right down into the direct history of all these different empires.
Yep.
And of course, how this whole entire Game of Thrones is happening.
Do we want to talk about the famous man?
Well, in the meantime, guys, if you have any questions about Singapore's pre-colonial history, which is what we're talking about today, please leave a comment about what you want to hear about. Maybe as part of our discussion today, we can actually talk about it.
Yep.
And we can also try to explain what we know. History is a really long time to explain, but if you've got some interesting bites, I think we really want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
Yep.
So let's get down.
Yep. So we'll start with Temasek.
Okay.
Temasek actually existed in the Sri Vijayan Empire. So that's probably one of the earliest like empire-based histories of Singapore, Singapura. And it was a small trading outpost inhabited by the Orang Lauts.
Okay. And Orang Lauts mean...
So these were people who were loyal to the Malay kings, and they were basically like your coast guards and like the people who basically were making sure that the island was protected.
Okay.
So they patrolled the sea areas, repelling pirates, and directing traders to Malay overlords' ports and maintaining those ports' dominance.
I see.
So there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening in this outpost, and it actually rose from a small trading outpost into a center of international trade with the Yuan dynasty. So basically, Singapore was already a port way before Raffles came, and I think a lot of people don't know that about our country.
I think the Orang Laut are actually ethnic group living in Singapore and Peninsular Malaysia,
Yep.
the Rawa Islands as well. So they were just people living on coastal islands.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think they formed the population of the people there that made up, and they were also quite loyal to the kings over there as well. Right?
Yeah. And
really,
so
really cool.
a lot of people still say, if you want to talk about the true Singaporeans, quote unquote, you kind of only talking about the Orang Laut. Like everyone else is an immigrant. so like
that would include me and you, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're not that old. This is like only a couple of 100 years old, and like.
Well, it's just a couple of 100 years.
I mean, compared to the whole history.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's basically Temasek.
Great.
Sang Nila Utama, though, that's a name that we kind of have to talk about. When people talk about Singapore's founding, they talk about two main people.
Okay.
The first one is Raffles.
Okay.
Raffles is quote unquote the father of modern Singapore. The person who basically made Singapore into an actual city, cosmopolitan city.
Okay.
But Sang Nila Utama is the name that people refer to when they talk about who founded this island, and that's in itself controversial. We'll talk about that later. Sang Nila Utama, his father is this person called Sang Sapurba, who is actually known as one of the common great ancestors of most Malay monarchies in the Malay world. So Sang Nila Utama is basically a descendant of this great Malay king. And that's why people always talk about Singapore as being inherited from a great man. Like Sang Nila Utama is actually a very famous man.
And Sang Nila Utama was actually from Palembang, right?
Yes.
Initially.
Yes.
And then later on, he sort of like traveled to Singapore or some sort.
So actually what was happening was that the empire that he was a part of, the Vijayan Empire, was currently being under siege. And so he was actually escaping from all the chaos that was happening, and he took refuge in Bintan. And so they were exploring Tanjung Bemban in Bintan when he saw an island with white sandy beaches while he was exploring that island. So I don't know where these white sandy beaches would be now, because we've reclaimed everything. But once they found out that that island was called Temasek, they set sail for it. This is a story that we'll hear from history books anyway. But along the way, they encountered a severe storm. They landed safely, and they went to hunt for wild animals for food. And while they were there, they saw a strange animal with a red body, a black head, and a white neck breast. So it was, they saw it move with great speed, and they asked the chief minister, Demang Lebar Daun, who was the chief minister of the Orang Lauts back then, what animal it was, and they told it was probably a lion. So
you know what? I actually did kind of like a research on an animal that has a red body, a black head, and a white neck breast.
Okay, what is that?
Yeah, so I've come to summarize the possibility for such a combination.
Sure.
So one of the things that were listed was number one, red panda.
Oh.
Number
red
two,
pandas are not native to us,
it's
right?
not. Number two was the red river hog.
Is that a pig?
It is a pig.
Okay.
It is a pig. And number three was actually the greater mouse deer.
Oh.
Yeah. So the greater mouse deer has a black snout,
a
red body, and actually had like white color markings on his neck down to its chest.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I tried to see what kind of description would best fit this. But you know what? The next part, which is it was a fine looking animal and moved at great speed. It didn't say about size.
Yeah.
So that maybe it might be a mouse deer or sorts.
And I actually read that lions are not even native to the island of Singapore.
Completely not.
Yeah, and so more likely is that if you did see a big cat, it was a tiger. So I mean, imagine if our name was Tiga City instead, Tiger City. It would be a very different history.
I suppose, definitely.
So basically, that's the story that he saw the lion.
Mer tiger, I suppose, would be. Mer tiger.
Yeah. So the story actually does not talk too much about the lion part of it. Basically, Lion City makes sense. He saw a lion, Singa, Pura city. The Merlion is actually an extension of that myth, where they talk about how because he saw the lion go into the river, or he saw the lion come out from the river, that's why he thought it was a Merlion.
Actually, very recent, the Merlion was a creation of this guy. I don't know which country he was from. He came over and he created this mascot for Singapore. He didn't claim the rights, and STB actually took it, and it
really?
Yeah, and it continued to be now today our understanding of the Merlion.
Yeah, but it's so weird because the Merlion doesn't exist.
Yeah,
it doesn't exist.
Right.
That I don't dispute that. But Sang-Nila Utama didn't even say anything about it, which is crazy. There's a couple of other stories of why the Lion City may not have come from Sang-Nila Utama. One of it is that it was basically adopted by Parameswara, who was the last king of Singapore. So some people, they don't actually recognize Sang-Nila Utama or his more formal name, Sri Buwana. They actually say that it was Parameswara, and he was reestablishing in Temasek the lion's throne that he had originally set up in Palembang. And we'll talk about the story later on.
Speaking of the Orang Lots, I mean, to continue this story, eventually Sang-Nila Utama was made the king or Raja of Singapore, right?
Yes.
And he essentially renamed Temasek to Singapura after you see that red creature that dashed into the forest. Yeah. And he made his capital at the mouth of the Singapore River. And well, that area actually, that settlement had actually a hill and a spring.
And we're talking about Fort Canning Hill?
Yeah, and we're talking about Fort Canning. So, I mean, historically, we wonder if they say, where is this fresh water spring happening? Actually, it kind of existed even almost into Raffles times as well. Yeah. So what happened to the spring that exists on the west side of Fort Canning was it served as a source of water in the early days of Singapore. And then the spring was called Bangka Larangan, or Forbidden Spring.
Okay.
And the woman of the ruler's house was said to bathe in ancient times. In the early period of the 19th century Singapore, the stream was used to provide clean water for the ships until it exceeded the capacity.
So what you're saying is that Fort Canning Hill was basically the heart of a kingdom purely based on the fresh water and
a strategic location to the mouth of the river. Yeah, definitely. And
so we had a kingdom here.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened to the spring was that people started digging out wells, and then the entire spring just kind of like dried up.
Yeah.
And then that was the end of the spring. So we don't really see the spring today, but it's actually pretty recent that the spring was still alive. Yeah. And so that was the history of that, the capital of where Sang-Nila Utama established his throne. Yeah.
So actually, for our Facebook Live viewers, if you have been to the National Museum, you would have seen actually some of the key artifacts that have been discovered. There have been artifacts that have been discovered around Fort Canning Hill that do point to this famous kingdom that has been set up in Singapore.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And of course, following on
the hill itself.
Yes.
The hill itself actually wasn't just strategically important. I think one thing that I read that was very interesting was it actually represented a much bigger mountain called Mount Meru.
Right.
And Mount Meru is basically the seat of the gods in Hindu and Buddhist mythology.
Okay.
So basically, what Sang-Nila Utama was doing was that he was saying, this hill is basically the same hill that the gods in my religion are at, and by virtue of that, the kingship and divinity that is associated with that is now here.
Right.
And so in Southeast Asia, he was basically making that mark, and he asserted his role as not just a king, but a semi-divine ruler.
It's like a common theme among kings, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
they ascend and become gods.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And he gave himself a super long name.
Okay.
Do you want to read it? I think you may have a better chance.
It says here, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correctly,
Sure.
and honestly, I think that's more of your native tongue than mine.
I think, okay. Well, you try it.
Okay, it's Sri Maharaja Sang Utama Paramiswara Batara Sri Tri Buana.
Yeah, good job.
Did I do it correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
You would have done it better than I did. So, but I'll do the easy one. Basically, what it means, is Lord Central King Batara of Sri Tri Buana, or as it's known, Sri Tri Buana basically means three world realm. So the Lord Central King Batara of the three world realm.
Three world realm.
Yeah, and the three worlds are basically referring to Palembang.
Okay.
Bintan, which is where he came from, and Singapore.
Singapore. Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah, and so basically that settlement grew into a thriving cosmopolitan city.
Okay.
There were a lot of trade ships that were coming from China and from South Asia, and that's where the pirates actually started thinking of attacking the Malacca Straits, because a lot of trade ships are coming through Singapore. And we'll talk about some of these trade stories with the Chinese historical sources as well.
Sure. But I think some of the scholars actually thought that this character was pretty much a fictional character.
Yeah.
And actually there's some alternative suggestions of how the name of Singapore was actually created. I think we talked about that earlier as well. It is, of course, definitely we talked about the likelihood of lions in Singapore. And to be honest, the more likelihood is actually there are tigers in Singapore.
Yeah, that's what I was saying just now. I think another story is basically that the whole lion aspect was just meant as a way to claim legitimacy.
Everything's okay with the locking up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, just for our viewers, by the way, we're actually using a space in a co-working space, and we're sharing a room. So at the same time, you may see people pop in and pop out, but
do not be alarmed.
Do not be alarmed. Yeah, but that's podcasting as we know it. But as we were saying, basically the lion was a way of just claiming divinity and making sure that when people heard the story that they thought that this was something that Sangharatama or whoever was founding had legitimacy to. But we'll talk about some of these stories later on. Why don't we talk about some of the kings that? So
essentially there are 5 kings in the reign of Singapore.
Yep.
And of course, Sanggila Utama was the first king.
Yes.
He was made the king by the Orang Laut.
Yep.
In history.
Yep.
And then subsequently, he was succeeded by this guy called Seri Wikrama Wira.
Yep.
Right. And essentially, the increasing powerful Javanese kingdom of Majapahit. Oh, am I pronouncing this correct?
I'm pronouncing it Majapahit, but
Majapahit. Okay.
I think if someone knows how to correct us, please do.
So remember, Majapahit was the Javanese side of the kingdom,
the ship-based, maritime-based empire.
And what happened is he began eyeing the growing influence of the tiny island kingdom, and under the leadership of his ambitious warlord, they started to embark on overseas expansion.
Yep.
And against all countries of the Nusantara, which is essentially Nusantara, which is actually north. I think it was north of Asia.
Yep.
And all the countries in north of Southeast Asia.
Yep.
And including the remnants of the Sri Vijaya. And so they actually went to Singapore to demand the submission of Singapore itself.
Exactly.
Right. So this was from the Javanese kingdom in the second history, which is Sri Ramawira, was actually taunted by this king from.
And so this is actually, Singapore has this huge history of sovereignty, right? Our sovereignty. Our sovereignty was being threatened because of our size way before, even as a small kingdom. And as it's in our culture, we refused. Even back then, we were like, we're not gonna give in. And so what happened was that Wikramawira sent a symbolic message, and he threatened to shave the Majapahit king's head should he proceed to Singapore. And so, as you would expect, the Majapahit king ordered an invasion with around 180 warships and innumerable small vessels. And the fleet passed through the island of Bintan, where people started spreading the news of Singapore, and the defenders, so the three realms, right, Palembang, Bintan, and Singapura, they basically assembled 400 warships to face the invasion, and they clashed on the coast of Singapore. So there was a battle that happened on the coast of Singapura. Wow. And because the Javanese soldiers back then were inexperienced in the region and in naval warfare, which is quite surprising, right? They were completely overwhelmed, and Singapore won. So that was our first battle. If you think about it, that's crazy. Back in around 1347.
So talking about 400 warships from the Singapura side and 130 other warships from the 180 warships
from the Majapahit side.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking that the odds are pretty grim for the 180 warships.
Yeah,
right?
You don't mess, right? I mean, if you think about it, right, a lot of Singapore's history, people have asked, like, why do we want to talk about stuff like this? Like, it's even before Raffles and even before our state as a city. But I mean, we were a small island all the way, and if we can tap into that part of our narrative, if we can tap into that part of our cultural icons, right? If you and historical stories, it's crazy that even back then we could show our clout and say, don't mess.
I suppose it's akin to the fact of why we would need such a strong naval force and naval presence in the region as well.
Yeah,
I think even in history, this was also very telling of how the region was like in naval warfare as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, look, the forces from the Majapahit were actually at Bintan, and just in a short while, the king actually put together 400 warship force. That's kind of crazy if you think about it.
I mean, that's what the story says. We can always question if that's reality, and in fact, what we'll find out later on is that some people have even disputed all of these stories, basically saying that it's some way to legitimize the claim of the Sri Vijayan family, that all of these kings never actually existed, or these war stories didn't exist. But we'll talk about that later.
Sure. So we talked about Sangla Utama. We talked about Seri Wikrama Wira.
Yes.
And now we're going to talk about the third king.
Yeah. So the third king, so Seri Wikrama Wira died in 1362.
Okay.
And he was succeeded by his son Seri Rana Vikrama.
Well, this is a tongue twister.
Yeah. It's gonna get harder, I think. but basically, in this person's story, I didn't actually find too many interesting things about Seri Rana Vikrama himself. But what I did find was a story of Badang.
Okay.
Have you heard of Badang?
Of course, definitely.
So Badang,
they play in the national parade. His story, I think, a few national.
Yeah. So those people who remember the NDP parade, they did this whole they like to do the cultural part of the show, and they did Badang. But Badang is actually a Singapore historical icon as well.
Yeah. But Badang was not from Singapore.
He wasn't. No. You want to tell the story?
Yeah, Badang was actually a Siamese kid from Sayong Pinang, which is pretty much Johor.
Okay.
Today, right?
Yeah.
And he was the only son of two poor farmers who worked hard until the day they died. So as a young man, Badang had to work as a coolie for a rich farmer.
Yep.
And essentially, it was almost like slavery in those days.
Okay.
Yeah. So
so he was just slogging his days away.
He was actually a slave.
Wow.
Yeah, he was actually a slave. I think for his own survival, he had to be a slave. So he didn't really get paid and received only a few handful of rice each day. So that's what happened. So this was really hardly enough hunger for such amount of work. So Badang relied on catching fish for extra sustenance. He set up fish traps along the stream every night and gathered the net the following morning. But essentially, the story is that Badang, on one day, he found that his traps didn't catch anything. He was really hungry. And then he fell into sleep, dreaming of making big someday, dreaming of giving his parents really fine clothes, really having food to eat.
He's a proper Asian kid, right?
And he even dreamt that he was able to throw a rock that traveled many miles away.
Yes, I remember this part of the story.
And he also dreamt that he swallowed something that came out from the mouth of an ugly beast, and that was able to give him strength.
Was this the demon that I remember
Well, you see,
the story?
this was the dream.
Okay.
And then what happened was after that, Badang woke up at dawn, and he saw the exact same beast in his dream.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I forgot about this part of the story.
So the beast was what they consider a hantu air, which is essentially a water spirit, a water ghost, if you want to call it. Yeah.
Oh, you know what we should do a whole episode about? Ghosts and supernatural stuff in Singapore.
Yeah. Well,
I think that would be like, I remember. Well, let's not distract ourselves. But I remember, like, what's the white lady called?
Pontiana.
Yeah, Pontiana.
Oh, okay.
That would be
maybe we
story.
could do a list of different kinds of ghosts and their sightings as well.
Right.
But anyway, the beast was a hantu air, really essentially the water ghost or water spirit, and it could just basically take the form of flora and fauna and bodies of water. So in some other versions, he looked like a short old man with long beard and long white hair.
Okay.
So that's what it is. But essentially, Badang saw this guy or saw this demon. He went up behind him and caught him by the hair. And essentially, this demon was really timid and he was scared of his wits.
That's a real bold move.
Yeah. I mean, for a person who just dreamt about beasts.
If I saw a demon, I'd be running away. I wouldn't know how to deal with it.
But essentially, this hantu said that he will grant Badang any wish if he spared his life.
Okay.
Yeah. So Badang thought about having the powers of invisibility, but he thought, you know what, I'll get caught and get hunted. So he said, nah, maybe not that. He thought about maybe having riches, but he was a slave.
Yes.
So therefore, anything he had in possession was his master's.
Oh, that's a horrible system.
You know what? So he decided maybe that's not a good idea. So instead, he actually wished for strength.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the demon said that if you swallow whatever I cough up, then you'll gain that strength. So the demon vomited all its fish, and Badang essentially just took all the fish, one bit and just ate it all.
How much fish did he eat?
I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, I mean, fish coming out from somebody else's mouth, that's not a great idea. But in some other stories, the demon actually caught up 2 red gems instead of fish. So kind of.
I would swallow the gems much easier than the fish.
If it's a really big gem.
Okay, fine. If it's a really big gem, Willie.
Well, when they talk about throwing up gems and collecting gems, that sounds like totally like a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, sounds like Badang was playing a RPG of sorts.
RPG.
Yeah. But you know what? So through the demon's word, Badang came immensely strong, and he walked back and he tested his strength with the trees, and he cleared the forest for his master. And the master was essentially so grateful that he actually freed him from slavery.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So so conveniently, I think he just said. I think it's more like he didn't want to mess with him.
Yeah, he was like, where did that come from? I don't want to know.
Yeah. You know what? You're free to go. So although it's attributed to the fact that he cleared the forest, but I think he's scared of his wits.
Yeah.
Okay, but essentially, he went on to go to Singapore to find work.
So that's how it's connected.
Yeah, exactly. So Badang eventually landed on Singapore. He was on his way there, or in Singapore, he saw 50 people trying to push an entire boat into the water, but they couldn't.
Like how big of a boat are we talking about?
I don't know. It just says a really heavy boat.
Okay.
I don't know what heavy boat this is, but it took 50 men.
Yeah.
And even the king sent 300 men to push this boat, and it just wouldn't go.
And this is the king that we were talking about, Seri Rana Wikrama.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So this same king sent 300 men to actually push the boat into the into the sea.
Yeah.
But they just couldn't. So when Badang saw it, he just said, "Hey,
waltzed on up."
He just said, "You know what? Let me try it." And they go like, "You know what? You're so scrawny."
Because he was always a small guy.
Yeah, he was. And so like, it's not gonna work. But until he protested and said, "You know what? Give me a shot." And the king went like, "Okay, fine." So he managed to push that heavy ship or heavy boat into the sea.
You know who Badang kind of reminds me of?
Who?
Captain America.
Really? Oh yeah. His transformation.
Exactly. I mean, Captain America became huge.
Yeah.
And Badang didn't. But I mean, we have a Captain Singapore, right?
Yeah.
Technically, Badang is Captain Singapore.
So I suppose there's hope for scrawny guys out there. If you see a random old man who's short with long hair It looks kind of like
catch him.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe not. Let's not.
This reminds me of some toys in the 90s, but never mind.
Okay.
Yeah. And then later on, because he was able to push the boat into the sea, the king made him his commander-in-chief. How convenient.
It makes sense.
Right. Yeah, but of course, because he was able to have the strength of 300 men.
Exactly.
That's incredible. But essentially, the next part of the story is that he often helped the villagers, and then he moved on. And then there was this king of Kalinga, which is in India, who heard about this story. He decided to send one of his strongest men for a challenge with Badang.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically had a test of strength, and they were both equals.
So there was someone who was just as strong.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow.
So they had one final test.
Where did all these strong people come from?
There are a lot of demons.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of demons puking.
Yeah.
But essentially, Badang, they were like equal. They were equal in strength.
Right.
So the king. So there was one final challenge, which is anybody who can lift this really, really big rock was to be crowned the winner.
Okay.
So the guy that Kalinga, the king of Kalinga, sent, he was able to lift that rock over past his knees. So it's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Right. But Badang went to take the rock over his head and threw it a few kilometers, and it landed at the mouth of the Singapore River.
Oh wow.
I just don't understand this part when they are both challenging a test of strength, and then yet this guy was like totally overpowered, could throw an entire rock into the Singapore River, couldn't out.
Because if I remember it right, I think it was part of his dream as well to throw a rock really far. So maybe it was like final fulfillment of that
that's
dream.
True. Yeah, maybe that's it.
And people say that we have that rock today, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that rock landed on the mouth of Singapore River. Unfortunately, it was blown up by some British. Trying to make modern Singapore.
Yes, I read about this. Yeah.
And so we now have what we call the fragments of this rock on our stone called the Singapore Stone, which of course you can go check it out at the National Museum of Singapore. So essentially that's the third history, or the third most catchy thing about the reign of this third king of Singapore. Was the story of Badang, and how Badang actually helped to put a rock in the mouth of the river.
And if you think about it, in the third king's reign, these stories were basically going around, right? People were hearing about this famous guy all the way in Singapore.
Yeah.
And again, like, why aren't these stories being told in our schools? And how come I have to search through the internet to find these things?
So you see, let's just do a recap. The first king,
Sang Nila Utama,
mistaken a lion.
Yeah.
The second king was pretty much more exciting, with a battle of 400 ships versus 180.
Yep.
Okay. The third king was the story of one of his commander-in-chiefs, which is Badang, which is overpowering, and of course put a rock at the Singapore River. Now let's talk about the fourth king.
Right. So I have here in 1375, Rana Vikrama was succeeded by his son, Seri Maharaja.
Okay. Another mouthful.
Yeah. And just to keep
Maharaja, that sounds like
an Indian
king, right?
Yeah.
We're getting
again, we're inheriting the empire from the Vijayan Empire.
Right, which were mainly Hindu empire, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so so by the way, just for our viewers, a lot of the information that we're getting is from this thing called the Malay Annals, which is a source of historical stories from the Malay archipelago and the region around here. And basically these people, the historical sources talk about, they only mention one key thing about Seri Maharaja. And that was the event of Todak ravaging the coast of Singapore. And for people who don't know what Todak is, it's basically garfish or needlefish. And I found that amusing. I was like, did this king have nothing else happen? But basically, this is a very interesting story by itself.
Okay, let's hear it.
So basically, what happened was that needlefish, for people who don't know what it is, these are fish that are capable of making short jumps out of the water at about 60 kilometers an hour.
Oh, cool.
And so because they swim near the surface, they often leap over the decks of shallow boats. And you can imagine Singapore, again, back then, a lot of boats, a lot of shipping that was going around. And these fish actually attack a lot of people.
So what about this story? I mean, of this needlefish or garfish that we're having? It was. I heard there's a story about a young boy.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a boy called Hang Nadim.
Okay.
That he basically was trying to figure out how do I get these todak to.
So these fish were attacking the shores of Singapore.
They were attacking the shores. They were attacking the boats that were around there. Okay. This guy wanted to get rid of them, and so what happened was that this kid actually fended off the todak by planting banana plants along the shoreline. So what happened was that when you plant these, similar to our mangroves, how they used to exist back then, these banana plants also created a natural protection from the todak. And it's just a young kid who came out with this ingenious idea. But unfortunately, as with everything,
so basically, this fish leapt out of water and landed themselves in a banana tree by puncturing a banana tree.
I think that's the myth.
I just heard some parts of the story was that people started to then have free fish because all these fish are just stuck on the bananas, just grab it.
I think I saw a cartoon about this
exactly.
Somewhere. Okay. Again, these stories, they don't get told too well. But yeah, so all these, you can just imagine the scene, the young kid planting all these banana plants and all these fish just jumping in. But the king was very grateful for this. And he was like, this was one of my biggest problems and you solved it.
Right.
But he also, this is the sad part, he felt so threatened by the boy's intelligence that he executed the kid. Can you imagine your reward for coming up with an ingenious idea as to get executed?
Right. And when I was growing up, I heard like a story where the blood of the boy that oozed out when the king killed this kid became Red Hill. I don't know whether remember that.
I did. Oh my God, I do remember the story.
Yeah. So
that's what this was.
Yeah, I think that was what we understood. But whether that was the true story of Red Hill, that's a different thing. I mean, there's so many versions of these stories that are repurposed. But I think these were one of the things that I heard. But back to these fish. I mean, these fish were a great problem even till today.
They still exist.
Yeah, they still exist. I mean, garfish or needlefish, like you said, swims at up at about 60 kilometers per hour. That's like really fast, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you get hit by a car at 60 kilometers per hour, you pretty much will really get injured pretty bad, right? So there were cases where in history, where two people died, or recorded history, two people actually died in modern days from needlefish.
In modern days,
exactly. So these two history was one in 1977 when a 10-year-old Hawaiian boy was doing night fishing with his father at Mala Bay, and he was killed when a 1 to 1.2 meter long needlefish jumped out of the water and pierced his eye and brain.
God.
Yeah, so these things are really, really a big problem. And the second one was a 16-year-old Vietnamese boy stabbed through the heart by a 15 centimeter long needlefish in 2007.
I would be very happy if I never ever have to see a needlefish.
So and this was in Halong Bay. Yeah. So really, these needlefish was truly a problem, and just understanding that how scary this needlefish is, you will see how big a problem it was for the king.
Yeah. People
couldn't really fish; they were getting stabbed to death while entering the water.
Exactly.
And this banana fish really helped to save them from the coastline and really to collect this. But it begs the question: Have you seen any needlefish lately?
I haven't, and again, like I said, I would be very happy not to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the myths I think growing up was I always thought it was swordfish. I always thought it was a swordfish or merlin or something like that, jumping out of the wall and stabbing a banana tree.
Yeah.
But actually, in reality, it's actually a smaller fish at about a meter long or 15 centimeters, called the garfish or needlefish.
Huh.
Yeah, so pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So again, we have four stories, each from a different king. We have the Lion City, we have the war story, we have Badang, and we have the needlefish story. So many interesting things from our history.
Yeah, so the fourth king was all about solving that problem with fish. Now let's talk about the last king.
And I've heard the last king is the most interesting one.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Because it involves murder, it involves a siege, and it involves basically people. This was the last king, the last king of Singapore. So just to give some context again, the empire more or less that is being based in Singapore is the three Vijayan Empire, and this is an empire that is contending with the Majapahit and kingdoms around as well. Basically, people were getting very jealous because Singapore was actually prospering. Singapore was prospering, and people wanted to figure out a way to get rid of it.
Or rather, take control of it, right?
Take control of it, right? And so the person in charge, they give the name Parameswara.
Okay.
But Parameswara isn't actually a name. It's a title that was given to a lot of people in that region. Some people say the actual name is Iskandar Shah.
Okay.
So it's a bit disputed. Parameswara is actually a Hindu name that means Supreme Lord. So that's why there's that dispute. And so basically, this person ruled Singapore from 1389 to 1398.
Right.
And what happened was that one day, because of a series of events, the Majapahit Empire actually attacked the kingdom, the island kingdom, and they tried to basically create a new stronghold in that area. So
the Parameswara fled.
Yep.
And essentially went on to Malacca.
Yep, exactly.
And then he established a kingdom right there.
Exactly.
But what I know in other historical texts, right?
Yep.
It actually indicated that this guy Parameswara, right, was actually one of the nobilities or kings in Palembang, right? And because he did something despicable, right? What he did was that I think he stripped a girl naked or something.
Yeah. So the story I have here is that Iskandar Shah, Parameswara, accused one of his concubines of adultery. And what happened was that as punishment, he stripped her naked in public. And the concubine's father, Sang Rajuna Thapa, was an official in the court. And he basically sent a secret message to someone in the Majapahit court, pledging the support should the king choose to invade Singapore. So it's one of those things where, like, you shamed me, I'm going to bring havoc on you.
Okay.
And so what happened was that the Majapahit dispatched a fleet of 300 men of war and 100 smaller vessels carrying no less than 200,000 men.
Wow.
And so basically what happened was that a Javanese soldier engaged with the defenders in a battle outside the fortress and then forced them to retreat behind the walls. And basically this siege, again, all happening around Fort Canning Hill.
Right.
Imagine Fort Canning Hill.
Right.
This huge battle happening. And the fortress was impregnable. And what happened was that...
But before that, what happened was that this king Parameswaran was actually fled from Palembang.
Yep.
And he went over to then Singapore, and he stayed there, and then which after he kind of like assassinated the local king.
Yes. Okay. So you're talking about the story before
right.
this. Okay. Yeah, we're talking about two different stories now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was talking about a story of how he got attacked. But you're talking about a story of how he attacked.
Right.
So okay, let's rewind a bit.
Okay, let's rewind a bit.
Okay. So for our viewers, basically, Sang Nila Utama was one of the most accepted founders of Singapore. But some people say Sang Nila Utama never existed. Like we mentioned, the Malay Annals, basically, a lot of people disputed as these people never existed. Parameswara was the only one that was considered factual.
Okay.
And because Parameswara was basically still part of the Vijayan Empire, people say that he and his compatriots created the illusion of all these other kings and all these other stories in order to make him more legitimate.
Okay.
And so that goes back to your story. Actually, how did he become king? He actually came and murdered the ruler of the island and took over the throne. And the lion's throne was actually, like we mentioned before, his way of carrying on the lion throne of his previous empire.
Right. And the reason why he went to Singapore then was because of this whole shame of the concubine.
Exactly. So that's one of the stories. The other story is basically the concubine thing happened as a result of him later on having to get attacked by the Majapahit Empire.
Right. But what we know is that he eventually became the king of Singapore.
Yes. So the facts as we know it, regardless of the myth.
When
so
he fled,
this gets really messy because this is a messy part of Singapore history. The facts or the most factual things. He was king. He did get run out of the country by the Majapahit Empire. And everything in between those things and before and after, they're fuzzy. So how did he become king? Did he inherit it from the Vijayan Empire, or did he escape Palembang and take over the throne? That's disputed. What happened in between? How did the empire get under siege? Was it because of this concubine story? That's also a legend, right? But essentially, those stories are just things people tell, to make it interesting.
But what happens? The Majapahit Empire actually made a siege onto Singapore.
Exactly.
And what happened was that it didn't go so well for Parameswaran.
No.
And he fled Singapore
and went to Malacca. Yeah. And so back then, Malacca still wasn't like an actual city center, or at least as far as I read. But him going there actually made it something.
I see.
So that's actually a very interesting story, and I actually have another piece of information. So you were talking about Red Hill previously, and that was the kid in the previous king's empire being killed.
That's right. That's the fourth king
for being too smart.
Yes.
Right. I actually have an alternative story. About Red
let's
Hill.
hear it.
And so remember how we were talking about the siege that was happening?
Yes.
People were stuck in the fortress. The story goes on actually to say that after a month, food in the fortress began to run low, and the defenders were almost going to get starved. So what happened was that the minister who was helping out the king Parameswaran lied to say the stores were empty, and when they were actually weren't, and he was basically trying to starve the people and get the Majapahit Empire to attack on a weak kingdom. And so what happened was that the gates were finally opened under the order of this minister, the father of the concubine, and the Majapahit rushed in, and a terrible massacre ensued. And so according to the Malay Annals, blood flowed like a river, and the red stains on the soil of Singapore, similar to the Red Hill story, is said to be the blood from that massacre. So Singapore has a bloody history. There's a lot of massacres, a lot of killings, and just things that I never knew about when I was before I was reading this.
But even there was a massacre, he still didn't do really well, and he still had to flee from the Singapore kingdom.
Exactly.
And he landed on Malacca.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So archaeological evidence actually suggests that main settlement was abandoned around this time. They can confirm that. And they still say that these things did happen. Fort Canning Hill has that. So unfortunately, they couldn't stop Parameswaran. He went over and he made Malacca a booming hub. And Malacca actually began to gain effective control of the straits, expand its influence to Sumatra, and actually managed to push back on the Majapahit Empire again.
Oh, okay.
And so
did it gain back Singapore?
Yeah, so they actually reabsorbed Singapore, and there's this famous Malaccan admiral called Hang Tuah, who also we can probably do a whole episode about. But this person actually was the warlord that took over Singapore.
Oh, okay.
So crazy stuff.
Right. And I think these are really parallel accounts from Chinese Zheng He Annals to the Malay Annals to even Portuguese accounts as well. I mean, they have very similar, some varying differences in their accuracy for history. But essentially all point to the existence of this king, Parameswaran. And of course the formation of Malacca as well. I think what happened was that Parameswaran would later became Iskandar Shah.
So the same name.
And so I think there's some confusion as to whether Iskandar Shah was the son of Parameswaran, or Parameswaran was actually Iskandar Shah himself. So I think that there were lots of really evidence that were trying to trying to see whether they were the same people or whether they was actually father and son.
Yeah.
But what we understand is that Zheng He, the then legendary explorer from the Ming Dynasty, and was his expedition down to this region in Southeast Asia, he actually went to meet Parameswaran.
Yep.
And he made him a Muslim.
Yeah, I read that too. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so and we understand that following from these 5 kings that Zheng He was one of the people that actually promoted Islam throughout Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Zheng He himself was he was a Muslim Chinese who had I mean, historical evidence will suggest that he was of Persian blood as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting, very interesting. But I can see the melting of so many different religions and cultures into Southeast Asia over such a short period of time. I mean,
there was even there's a travelogue that I found out about called Dao Yi Zhi Lue. Am I pronouncing it right?
Dao Yi Zhi Liu.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
Don't quote me. I just sound Chinese.
And basically, Dad was talking about Zheng He's like adventures in this area,
right?
And he refers to 2 settlements actually.
Okay.
And this was during the era of the kings, the 3 Vijayan kings. So one was basically the strait between Sentosa and Labrador,
right?
And that was called Longyamen.
Longyamen, that's right.
Which basically means dragon's teeth.
Exactly.
Gate.
Wow, very good pronunciation.
Thank you. I'm naturalized into the Chinese part of Singapore very well. But basically, what happened? The dragon teeth is basically refers to these 2 rocks,
right?
Huge rocks in that area, which was used by Zheng He to navigate the waters around there. And the British actually call that same place Lot's wife, in reference to the story of how people would transform into pillars of salt.
Right.
So it was very interesting because they called that Longyamen, and then they called the other region, which is the Fort Canning Hill area that we've been talking about, as Banzu or Banchu. Am I pronouncing it?
Banchu.
Yeah. So they were basically, the story that they say is, Longyamen is where all the pirates are. So anytime they would go through that very treacherous settlement, pirates would attack. So that's the story of Singapore's pirates. That's like when Chinese travelers talk about Singapore as a land of pirates, they're referring to Longyamen.
Right.
And then Banju is Fort Canning Hill area where the kingdom was. And so Zheng He actually was witness to a lot of this. He even mentioned later on how these people did get attacked by the Majapahit or the Sai, or like, they basically
pirates.
No. So they were talking about later on when Parameswaran got run out. Zheng He actually wrote about that, and he basically said that thing was there. The Portuguese have an account where they talk about the Siamese attacking Singapore, but they don't talk about the kingdom ending. They basically talk about how it just declined gradually because Parameswara Iskandar Shah decided, Singapore is too fragile, I'll go to Malacca and I'll just do more trade there. So there's a lot of difference in accounts, but ultimately all of them talk about the same thing.
Right. I'm just thinking that Southeast Asia has so much history, so much culture. I mean, the region around it, and really Singapore is right smack in the middle of that action as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, with these 5 different kings, but what we are seeing is that if you look at it broadly, you are seeing 2 large empires clashing, and then one visiting empire trying to see what is going around in this region, like Chinese. So we have even Buddhism, we have Hinduism with animism that's coming in, different people, and then here we have Zheng He bring Islam into the region. So surprisingly, I think this area is such a melting pot of different cultures.
Oh yeah, and it gets so confusing again because everyone has an agenda in promoting that history. Right. So we could have made some mistakes in our story today, and if you have, our viewers and listeners, if you have more authoritative or clarification, like, do let us know either in the comments or messages on Facebook. But it's crazy how so many things happen. So just to kind of conclude this whole narrative. So kings, there were
empires,
there were wars, and there was Chenghe just going around. What happened was that ultimately the local the Muslim forces kind of took over the region. That's how Southeast Asia became prone to so much Muslim influence.
And then thereafter this story, we have the period of the colonists as well. Became the colonized, whether it's Portuguese, or the Spanish, or the British. And then thereafter, shortly after, we've seen Raffles.
Exactly.
So really, I think we've been concentrating so much in the history of maybe Sangyana Itama or maybe Raffles, but really this area of Singapore has so much history, so many kings, so many battles, so many folklore and myths.
Oh yeah, and again, I learned this in college at some point, but we use myths and stories to talk about some of our biggest cultural values.
Right.
We use narratives like this to kind of make us more confident and more embedded in who we are. And if we forget about this part, or we just throw it aside, I don't know if we're completely embracing what it means to live on this island. Even as an immigrant, I still tap into the narratives that happen on the soil, right? And that's just amazing to think about.
So yeah, I think that's the 1 hour we have for today.
Yeah.
I hope that we've lambasted everywhere with so much historical stories.
And if you want to read more, there's a lot of resources online. I highly encourage every Singaporean to go and look for some kind of historical book. Wikipedia was actually very useful in this. There was a lot of clicking through the rabbit hole, but Wikipedia has a great amount of information on all these empires, and it's really interesting to read. And hopefully you learn some fun facts. There's so many side episodes that we can do. King, one of our viewers, who I know, hi King, talked about the Singapore stone having an inscription. That's a whole episode by itself. How basically Singaporeans, historians, and archaeologists are still trying to figure out what that inscription says.
Yes, that's right.
So it's a lot of stuff to dig into. I highly encourage everyone to especially as we're disputing a lot of our history today. And I think that's fair. Like, it is worthy to reevaluate some of the stories we're told, to ask ourselves, actually, where do these stories come from, to take a broader look at it.
Of course. And of course, those of you who are interested in the stories of the 5 kings, of course, do check it out. Do also understand that we are right smack in the middle of many different large empires. And really, they also have a rich history that created different cultures and different kinds of stories within the region as well. So I encourage everybody also check it out as well. So anyway, that's all we have for today.
That's it.
So my name is Willie, and this is
Rovek,
and hope that you join us next time on another episode of SG Explained.
All
right, see you guys.
See you.